Welcome to North Stories. I've been living two lives for as long as I can remember. The one I showed the world, the one where I was just a guy, a regular Joe trying to get by. And then there was the other life. The life that started when I was 10 years old, when I first got a glimpse of what real power looked like. That's when I met Vito. He wasn't just some guy. He was a man who could change your life with a snap of his fingers. And from that moment on, all I ever wanted was to be like him. My name's Tony Marconi, and I was born in a small, cramped apartment in Queens, New York. Growing up, we didn't have much. My father was a mechanic, and my mother took odd jobs just to keep food on the table. I used to watch my old man come home every day, tired and beaten down, and I'd swear to myself that wouldn't be me. I wasn't going to end up in a dead-end job, barely scraping by. I wanted more. I wanted the life Vito had. You see, Vito wasn't like the other guys in the neighborhood. He had everything: flashy suits, expensive cars, and a swagger that made you feel like nothing could touch him. I remember watching him pull up in front of the diner, tossing the keys to his Cadillac to some kid to park for him. And then he'd stroll inside, like he owned the place. All the waiters knew him. People stepped aside when he walked by. He didn't wait in line, didn't pay for meals. He didn't live by the rules, and I loved that. Vito noticed me too. Maybe he saw something in me, some hunger, some drive. Or maybe he just needed another set of hands to do his dirty work. Either way, he called me over one day while I was standing on the street corner with some of the other kids, watching him from a distance. I was nervous, yeah, but I wasn't about to show it. He looked me up and down, like he was sizing me up for something. "Kid," he said, his voice smooth and full of authority. "You want to make some real money?" I didn't even have to think about it. I nodded, and that was it. That was the moment my life changed. At first, it was small stuff. Running errands, delivering packages to people I didn't know. Vito's guys would give me an envelope and tell me to take it to some address across town. I never asked what was in it, and they never told me. But the pay? It was more than I'd ever made cutting lawns or washing cars. I got to wear nice clothes, have a little cash in my pocket, and people started treating me differently. I wasn't just some kid anymore. I was Tony, the kid who worked for Vito. Over time, I started to get a feel for how things worked. Vito wasn't just some random tough guy. He was connected. He had friends everywhere, in places you wouldn't expect. Cops, politicians, business owners. They all owed him something, or maybe they were just scared of him. Either way, Vito ran things, and people knew not to cross him. By the time I was 16, I was doing more than just running errands. I was pulling in bigger scores, helping Vito with the rackets, extortion, protection, loan sharking. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to pay just for the privilege of not having their store windows smashed in. And I was good at it. I kept my mouth shut, did what I was told, and I never made a scene. That's how you survive in this life. You don't draw attention to yourself, and you never, ever act like you're bigger than the boss. But I wanted to be bigger. I wanted to be more than just another guy in Vito's crew. And I knew that to get there, I had to prove myself. So when the chance came, I didn't hesitate. There was a guy, Sal Martino. He ran a nightclub down in Brooklyn, and he'd been late on his payments to Vito for months. He was playing games, acting like he didn't have the cash when everyone knew the place was packed every weekend. Vito had had enough. He told me and a couple of the other guys to go down there and remind Sal what happens when you don't pay your debts. I still remember the look on Sal's face when we walked into his office. He was sweating, nervous, trying to talk his way out of it. He promised he'd have the money next week, swore on his mother's grave. But we all knew it was a lie. So we did what we were there to do. I won't go into the details, but let's just say Sal didn't have any more problems making his payments after that. That was my first real taste of violence. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me liked it. Not the blood, not the pain, it wasn't about that. It was about the power. The feeling that you could walk into a room and make someone do exactly what you wanted, just because you said so. That was the life I wanted. And from that day on, I was all in. Vito noticed. He started giving me more responsibility, letting me handle bigger jobs. I was moving up fast. And with that came all the perks: money, women, respect. People who used to look right through me were now falling over themselves to shake my hand, buy me a drink. I had the world at my feet. But with all that power came danger. The more you have, the more you have to lose. And in this world, loyalty only goes so far. One wrong move, one bad decision, and you could end up in a ditch somewhere, forgotten by everyone. I'd seen it happen to guys I knew, guys who thought they were untouchable. They'd get sloppy, or they'd cross the wrong person, and that was it. Game over. Still, I wasn't about to let fear slow me down. I had a plan, a vision for where I wanted to go. I wasn't just going to be one of Vito's guys forever. I was going to be Vito. I wanted to be the one calling the shots, the one everyone feared and respected. And I knew that to get there, I had to keep climbing, keep proving myself. The next few years were a blur. I was in my early 20s by then, and I was making serious money. I had my own crew, guys who worked for me, who looked to me for orders. We ran all kinds of operations: gambling, drugs, stolen goods. Whatever made money, we were in it. And we were good at it. Business was booming, and Vito was happy. As long as I kept bringing in cash, he didn't care how I did it. But the thing about success is, it makes you enemies. And in our line of work, enemies aren't just a nuisance, they're a threat to your life. One wrong move, and they'll take you out without a second thought. I found that out the hard way when one of our shipments got hit. It was a big score, millions in cash and merchandise. And someone had tipped off the feds. They swooped in, confiscated everything, and arrested 2 of my guys. It was a disaster. Vito was furious, and I knew the heat was on me. If I didn't fix this, if I didn't find out who'd sold us out, I was as good as dead. I spent weeks trying to track down the rat. Nobody was talking, and every lead I followed seemed to go nowhere. It was like chasing a ghost. But then, one night, I got a tip from a guy I knew down at the docks. He'd heard whispers that a guy named Johnny Pappas, who used to work with us, had been cozying up to the cops. Johnny and I went way back. We'd done jobs together, shared drinks, talked about the future. And now, here I was, about to put a bullet in his head. It was a hard decision, but in this life, loyalty only goes so far. I had to make an example of him. If people thought they could sell us out and get away with it, I'd be finished. When I finally found Johnny, he was holed up in some crummy apartment down in Jersey. He looked like hell, sweaty, nervous, like he knew what was coming. He tried to talk his way out of it, just like Sal had. He swore he didn't do it, that it was a setup, but I wasn't listening. I couldn't. I pulled the trigger, and that was the end of Johnny Pappas. The thing is, I wasn't even sure if he was guilty. But that didn't matter. In our world, appearances are everything. If I let Johnny go, it would have made me look weak. And in this life, weakness is a death sentence. That was the first time I realized how deep I was in. I'd killed a friend, someone I'd known for years, all because I thought it might save my own skin. And for what? More money, more power? It was getting harder to tell. But there was no turning back now. As I stood there, looking down at Johnny's lifeless body, I knew this was just the beginning. After Johnny, things changed. I changed. That line I thought I'd never cross, the one where you start doing things that haunt you, it wasn't just behind me. It was so far back I couldn't even see it anymore. And once you get to that point, everything gets blurry. You stop worrying about right and wrong. You start thinking only about survival. I didn't feel much after Johnny, just numbness. In a way, that was easier. I could do whatever needed to be done, no hesitation, no guilt. I pushed on, did what Vito needed, what the family needed, and what I needed to keep climbing. I convinced myself that if I kept moving up, if I made enough money, pulled off enough jobs, I'd feel something again. That I'd get to a point where all the bloodshed, all the betrayals would feel worth it. But that numbness? It can only carry you so far. It wears off eventually. Not long after Johnny, we had a job, a big one. A heist that was supposed to set us all up for life. It was a jewelry haul in Midtown, at a place where the security was a joke compared to the payday waiting inside. The guys I had lined up for the job were good: Rico, my right-hand man, and a couple of young kids looking to make a name for themselves. We cased the place for weeks, knew everything from when the guards took their smoke breaks to how long it would take for the cops to get there if things went south. The plan was airtight. Or at least, it should have been. But nothing ever goes as smoothly as you hope in this business. The night of the job, everything started out just like we expected. We hit the place at exactly the right time, past midnight, when the streets were quiet, the sidewalks empty. The kids I brought with me were nervous, but they kept it together. Rico, as always, was solid, cool as ice. We got in, cleared the safes, and loaded the bags with diamonds, cash, everything. Millions worth. Enough for us to disappear for a while, lay low, maybe even start thinking about the next chapter of our lives. We were in and out in less than 10 minutes. But when we hit the street, something was wrong. There was a car, parked across from the alley where we'd stashed our getaway vehicle. Its headlights were off, but there was no mistaking the outline of two men sitting inside, watching us. Cops? Maybe. Feds? Could be. Or maybe it was some other crew who'd caught wind of the heist, waiting to jump us for the score. I didn't know, and in that moment I didn't have time to find out. Stay cool, I told the guys. We stick to the plan. We started walking toward the car, slow and deliberate, trying to act like nothing was wrong. The bags were heavy, but we kept them close, blending in as best we could with the shadows of the alley. The problem was, whoever was in that car wasn't just there for decoration. As soon as we got close, the engine roared to life, the tires screeching as the car pulled out of the alley and cut us off at the end of the street. The driver's door swung open, and a guy I'd never seen before stepped out, gun in hand. He wasn't wearing a badge, but that didn't make him any less dangerous. "You boys got something that doesn't belong to you," he called out, voice full of arrogance, like he knew we were trapped. I could hear Rico beside me, muttering curses under his breath. The two kids, they were frozen, like deer in headlights. We couldn't afford to hesitate, not now. "Go back the way we came," I whispered to the guys. "Don't stop. I'll handle this." It was a risk, a big one. But it was the only option we had. I knew if we stayed, it would turn into a shootout, and with the diamonds and cash we were carrying, we couldn't afford that kind of attention. As the guys backed up slowly, I stepped forward, my hand inside my coat, fingers wrapped around my gun. The guy in front of me, he saw the movement and grinned, like he thought this was some kind of game. "You're making a mistake," I said, locking eyes with him. "You don't know who you're messing with." "Funny," he replied. "I was just about to say the same thing." And then, without warning, he fired. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the empty street, and I felt a sharp sting in my side. The bullet had grazed me, nothing fatal, but enough to piss me off. Before he could fire again, I pulled my own gun and squeezed the trigger. Twice. He dropped instantly, crumpling to the pavement, his gun clattering out of his hand. But that wasn't the end of it. The passenger door flew open, and another guy jumped out, gun raised, ready to finish what his partner started. This time, Rico was there. He stepped out of the shadows, calm and deadly, and put the guy down with a single shot to the chest. In seconds it was over. But we couldn't stick around to admire our work. "Let's go!" I barked, grabbing the bags and pushing the kids into the getaway car. Rico got behind the wheel, and we sped off into the night, leaving the bodies and the chaos behind us. The adrenaline was still pumping as we drove through the deserted streets, the lights of the city flickering by. My side throbbed where the bullet had grazed me, but it was a small price to pay. We'd pulled it off. Barely, but we did it. We had the diamonds, the cash. We had everything. But something didn't sit right. I didn't know those guys, but they knew us. They knew exactly where to be, when to hit us. That wasn't a coincidence. As we sped through the city, my mind was racing. Someone had tipped them off. Someone inside our operation had sold us out. And I knew there was only one way to deal with a rat. I spent the next few days laying low, trying to figure out who had betrayed us. Rico was solid, no question there. The kids, they were too scared, too new to even know enough to tip anyone off. That left one possibility. Mickey, the fence who'd helped us set up the heist. He was a smooth talker, always had his fingers in too many pies. I trusted him because Vito trusted him. But now, I wasn't so sure. I paid Mickey a visit the next night. It was late, and he was holed up in his office above a strip club he owned on the Lower East Side. The place was quiet, empty, except for a couple of girls sitting at the bar, waiting for customers that never came. Mickey was in his office, smoking a cigar, feet up on his desk, like he didn't have a care in the world. When he saw me walk in, his smile faltered just a bit, but he covered it quickly. "Tony," he said, flicking ash off the end of his cigar. "What brings you here this late?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Someone sold us out, Mickey. Someone told those guys about the job. And I think you know who?" His eyes flickered, just for a second. He tried to play it cool, but I could see the fear creeping in. I stepped closer, keeping my hand on the gun in my coat. "I didn't say nothing," Mickey protested, his voice a little too high-pitched. "I swear on my mother's grave, Tony. You know me. I wouldn't do that." I stared at him, long and hard. I'd known guys like Mickey my whole life. They were always looking for an angle, always thinking they could outsmart everyone else. But in this world, there's no such thing as outsmarting the boss. There's only one way out if you cross the wrong people. "You've got 5 seconds to come clean," I said, my voice cold. "Tell me who you talked to, or you won't walk out of this office." Mickey's face paled, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. He started stammering, trying to explain, trying to wiggle his way out of it. But it was too late. I wasn't in the mood for excuses. I pulled the gun, and he froze. "Wait, Tony, wait." It was over before he could finish. One shot, clean, right between the eyes. Mickey slumped back in his chair, his cigar still smoldering in the ashtray. I stood there for a moment, the silence of the office thick around me. Another body, another problem solved. But the satisfaction I used to feel after taking care of business, it wasn't there anymore. All I felt was the emptiness creeping in, slowly swallowing up whatever was left of me. As I walked out of Mickey's office, I knew that this was the life I'd chosen. And once you're in, you don't get to just walk away. You don't get happy endings. But at that point, I wasn't looking for one. I was just trying to survive. By the time I got back to my place, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving only the dull ache in my side where the bullet had grazed me. I poured myself a drink, something strong, and sat down to think. Mickey was dead, but something still didn't add up. He wasn't the mastermind behind this. He wasn't that smart, or that bold. He was a middleman at best, a pawn. There was someone bigger pulling the strings, and I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. The next morning, I met with Rico. We kept our meetups discreet, public places, somewhere crowded where no one would think twice about two guys having a conversation. That day, we chose a diner down by the waterfront, the kind of place where the waitresses had seen it all and didn't care about your business. Rico was already sitting in a booth when I walked in, sipping his coffee like it was any other day. "Morning," he said as I slid into the seat across from him. His eyes flicked down to my side where the bandage peeked out from under my jacket. "How's the wound?" "I've had worse," I muttered, waving it off. The truth was, it stung like hell, but I wasn't about to let Rico see that. We ordered breakfast, eggs and bacon, but neither of us touched the food. We were here for one thing, to figure out who else might have been involved. "I took care of Mickey," I said, keeping my voice low. "But it doesn't feel finished. He was small time. There's someone bigger behind this, and they're still out there. Rico nodded, but I could see the worry etched on his face. He'd been with me a long time, through the good and the bad, and he knew better than anyone that loose ends in our line of work don't stay loose for long. They come back to strangle you. Who do you think it is? Rico asked, his voice steady but with an edge of tension. I stared out the window for a second, watching the boats drift along the harbor. There were too many possibilities, too many names floating around in my head. But one name kept coming back to me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Lenny Costello, I finally said. Rico raised an eyebrow, surprised. Lenny? That lowlife? Lenny was a hustler, a bottom feeder. He ran a small-time gambling operation out of Staten Island, but he wasn't one of Vito's guys. He worked on the fringes, someone we'd let do his thing as long as he stayed in his lane. But lately, I'd been hearing whispers. Lenny had been getting ambitious, trying to make moves, expand his operation. And someone like him? He'd sell out his own mother if it meant he could step up the ladder. I don't know for sure, I admitted. But I've got a gut feeling he's tied to this somehow. Maybe he saw an opportunity and took it. Rico nodded slowly, processing the information. You want me to handle it? I shook my head. No. This one's personal. I'll take care of Lenny myself. But I need you to dig deeper, find out if anyone else is involved. We need to cut the head off the snake before it comes back to bite us. Rico agreed, and we left it at that. But as I walked out of the diner, something gnawed at me. There was more going on here than I could see. This wasn't just about money or territory. This was about power. And in our world, the fight for power was never clean. That night, I went to see Lenny. He operated out of a dingy warehouse on the edge of Staten Island, the kind of place that smelled like rust and old sweat. When I pulled up, there were a couple of his guys standing outside, playing tough but looking bored. They gave me a once-over as I stepped out of my car, but they knew who I was. No one was dumb enough to start trouble with someone like me, not when my name was tied to Vito's. Inside, Lenny was sitting at a poker table, surrounded by a few low-level hustlers. He was laughing, throwing back drinks, like he didn't have a care in the world. When he saw me walk in, the laughter died in his throat. Tony, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Didn't expect to see you here. What can I do for you? I didn't bother sitting down. I stood over him, letting the weight of my presence do the talking. We need to talk, Lenny. The room went silent. The other guys at the table suddenly found excuses to leave, slipping away into the shadows. Lenny tried to play it cool, but I could see the sweat starting to bead on his forehead. Talk about what? He asked, though we both knew where this was going. The job in Midtown, I said, keeping my voice low but firm. The one you tipped off. Lenny's face drained of color. He tried to play dumb, but he wasn't good enough to pull it off. I don't know what you're talking about, Tony. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You crossed a line, Lenny. And you know what happens to guys who cross lines? Panic flashed in his eyes, and he started stammering. Wait, Tony, listen, it wasn't like that, okay? I didn't mean for things to go that way. I swear. It was just business, you know? Just business. Just business, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. That phrase, how many times had I heard it before? How many times had I said it myself? But the truth was, in this world, business and life were one and the same. Betrayal wasn't just a professional hazard, it was personal. I gave you a long leash, Lenny, I said, taking a step back. I let you play your games, as long as you stayed out of my business. But now you've made it personal. And there's no coming back from that. Before Lenny could open his mouth to protest, I reached into my coat, pulled out my gun, and leveled it at him. He froze, eyes wide with terror, hands raised in a pitiful gesture of surrender. Tony, please, he begged, his voice cracking. I can make it right. I can. The shot echoed through the warehouse, loud and final. Lenny slumped forward in his chair, his drink spilling across the table, mixing with the blood. I stood there for a moment, watching as the life drained out of him. Another one down. Another problem solved. But as I left the warehouse, the satisfaction I used to feel after a clean hit, it wasn't there. Just like with Mickey, it left me feeling hollow, like I was digging myself deeper into a hole I couldn't climb out of. I drove back to the city in silence, the streets blurring past me. By now, I knew the game too well. I knew the rules, and I knew that for every person you take out, 2 more are waiting in the wings to take their place. The power struggle never ends. And with Vito getting older, there were whispers about who would take over. Some people thought it'd be me. Others weren't so sure. The next morning, I got a call from Vito. He never called me directly, not unless something big was going down. When I heard his voice on the other end, cold and distant, I knew this was no ordinary conversation. "Tony," Vito said, "we need to meet. Tonight. I've heard some things. We need to talk." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The walls were closing in. That night, I walked into Vito's house, feeling the weight of years pressing down on me. We'd been through so much together, built an empire, and now everything felt like it was unraveling. Vito sat in his usual spot, the dim light casting shadows across his lined face. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him, like the years of running this life had finally caught up to him. "Tony," he said without looking up, "I've heard things. About Lenny. About Mickey. About you." I didn't say a word. I just stood there, waiting for him to finish. "You've been cleaning up messes," Vito continued, his voice low and gravelly. "But the mess is bigger than you think. There's more going on here than you know. And it's time I told you the truth." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that whatever Vito was about to say, it was going to change everything. "What truth?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vito finally looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. "It's not just about the money, Tony. It's about power. And the people who really have it, they've been watching you. Watching us. And they don't like what they see." I felt the ground shift beneath me as I realized I wasn't just caught in a power struggle. I was a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Vito's words hung in the air like smoke from a smoldering fire, slowly curling around my thoughts, suffocating everything I thought I knew. It wasn't just about the street power, about turf or money. No, Vito was talking about something bigger, something deeper, something I hadn't seen coming. "The people who've been watching us," Vito said, his voice steady but grim. "They aren't part of the life, Tony. They're outside it, but they hold the real strings. Politicians, corporate giants, even some in law enforcement. They let us do what we do because it keeps the streets in check. But lately," he trailed off, lighting a cigar, the flicker of the lighter reflecting off his eyes. I sat down across from him, the weight of his words sinking in. "You're telling me this whole time, we've been working for them. Not Vito, not the family? We've been working alongside them," he corrected, his gaze cold. "But only as long as we play by their rules. We step out of line, they tighten the leash. And recently we have stepped out of line." It started to click. The heist, Mickey, Lenny, this wasn't just internal squabbling. It was part of something bigger, a plan to send a message. Those bodies in the streets, the deals falling apart, it wasn't just bad luck. Someone out there was orchestrating a downfall, letting us drown while we thought we were still swimming. "Who?" I asked, leaning forward. "Who are they?" Vito puffed on his cigar, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Doesn't matter. You don't get to know their names. But you've felt their reach. That's why Mickey had to go. He wasn't just a rat, he was working with them, feeding them information about our moves. And Lenny? He was trying to cut his own deal with them, thought he could play both sides. They let us take him out because he was a loose end for them too." I shook my head, trying to process it all. My whole life, I thought I was in control, that I was making my own way, carving out my piece of the pie. Now it felt like I was just a puppet, dancing on a string I hadn't even known was there. "So what now?" I asked, feeling the frustration bubbling up inside me. "What do they want?" Vito leaned back in his chair, taking another slow drag of the cigar before he spoke. "They want us to fall in line. They want me to keep you under control. They think you're too ambitious, too volatile. All this heat you've been drawing, it's bad for business, for them and for us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've been doing what's best for the family. Everything I've done has been for us." Vito sighed, the weariness evident in his expression. "I know that, Tony. But they don't care. They see you as a threat, and in their world, threats don't get warnings. They get taken out. That's why I'm talking to you now, before they decide you're too much trouble." I stared at him, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and confusion. "So what's the play here, Vito? You going to hand me over to them? Make me disappear?" Vito's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in him before: fear. "I'm not handing you over. But I can't protect you forever. You need to lay low, let things cool off. Stop making waves, stop drawing attention. If you don't, well, I won't be able to stop what's coming." I clenched my fists, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. I'd worked too hard, fought too long to be told to step back, to let someone else decide my fate. But at the same time, I wasn't stupid. I knew when I was outgunned. And right now, these people, whoever they were, they had all the cards. "You're telling me to lay low," I said slowly. "But for how long? How do I know they won't come for me anyway?" Vito didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his face hard as stone. "You don't." I let the silence stretch out, weighing my options. I could run, but where? I could fight back, but against who? In this game, the players were invisible, the stakes higher than I'd ever imagined. For the first time in a long time, I felt trapped. Finally, I nodded. "All right, Vito. I'll lay low. For now." Vito studied me for a moment, then gave a slow nod in return. "Good. That's the smart play. Trust me, Tony, I don't want to lose you. You're like a son to me. But this is bigger than either of us." As I stood to leave, Vito stopped me with a final word of warning. "One more thing. Watch your back. There's more than just them out there. The family, some of them are starting to question your moves. You've made enemies, Tony, and they're not all on the outside." I didn't say anything, just nodded and walked out. But his words stayed with me, echoing in my head as I drove through the dark streets of the city. Enemies inside the family. I knew what that meant. Some of the old guard, the guys who'd been with Vito since before I came up, they didn't like how fast I was rising. They didn't like that Vito trusted me more than he trusted them. And now, with all this heat, they were seeing an opportunity to take me down from the inside. It was a dangerous time, and I knew I had to be careful. But I wasn't about to sit back and wait for the hammer to fall. I needed to make my next move, quietly, carefully, but I needed to do something. Laying low wasn't in my nature, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let anyone else decide my fate. Over the next few weeks, I kept my head down, but I didn't stop working. I started reaching out to the few guys I could still trust, Rico, of course, and a couple of others who had been loyal to me since day one. We started putting together a plan, a way to turn the tide back in our favor. Rico was the first to bring up the idea. "We need leverage, Tony. Something we can use against them. If we're gonna survive this, we need something they want, something they're afraid of." I knew he was right, but the problem was figuring out what that something was. These people, the ones Vito talked about, they had more power than we did, more connections, more resources. But they had one weakness, one thing they couldn't control: information. I started digging, using every contact I had in the streets, in the police department, even in the corporate world. I needed dirt, something on the people who were pulling the strings, something I could use as insurance. It was risky, but I knew it was the only way to protect myself. If I could find something they didn't want getting out, I could buy myself some time. Maybe even flip the script. As the days passed, I kept up appearances, showing up at the clubs, keeping my operations running smoothly, making sure the money was still flowing. But underneath the surface, I was working on something bigger. I had a few leads, but nothing solid yet. And the clock was ticking. One night, a break came in the form of an old contact, a guy I hadn't spoken to in years, a former accountant for one of the bigger construction unions in the city. He'd fallen on hard times after a bad deal with the wrong people and had gone underground, laying low. But he still knew things. Things that might help me. We met in a dingy bar on the outskirts of the city, a place where no one knew my face. He was nervous, twitchy, but after a few drinks, he started talking. "There's something big going down," he said, glancing around the bar like he expected someone to jump out at him. "The unions, the politicians, even some of the cops, they're all in on it. And it's not just about the money, Tony. It's about control. They're buying up land, rigging contracts, laundering millions. But there's more. They've got dirt on judges, senators, people who can make your life disappear with a phone call." I leaned in, my pulse quickening. This was it, the leverage I needed. "What kind of dirt?" I asked, my voice steady, but my mind racing. He hesitated, then pulled a file from his jacket, sliding it across the table. "Names?" He slid the file across the table with trembling hands. I hesitated for a second before picking it up. It felt heavier than it should have, like I was holding a loaded gun, the kind of thing that could kill or save depending on how it was used. I opened it, quickly scanning the contents, names, dates, financial records, even photos. It was all there. Judges, senators, high-level cops, and city officials, all tangled in the web of corruption, tied together by bribes, threats, and dirty favors. The union racket was just the tip of the iceberg. There were real estate deals, public contracts for highways and government buildings, everything rigged to flow money into the right pockets. And the names on the papers? They weren't just the ones calling the shots from behind the scenes. They were the people Vito had warned me about, the ones I'd been fighting without even knowing who they were. "You're sure about this?" I asked, my voice low, though I already knew the answer. The evidence was right there in front of me. The accountant nodded, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "I've been sitting on this for a while, trying to figure out how to use it without getting myself killed. But I've got nothing left, Tony. I need protection. And I know you're the only one with the balls to take these people on." I closed the file and slid it back into my coat. The weight of it pressed against my chest, a constant reminder that I was playing with fire. But this was my way out. This was the insurance I needed to keep the wolves at bay. If they wanted me dead, they'd have to think twice now. With this in my hands, I had leverage. "You'll get protection," I told him, standing up from the table. "But you stay quiet. You don't talk to anyone else about this, not even your shadow. Understand?" He nodded quickly, his eyes wide with fear. "I swear, Tony. I won't breathe a word." I left the bar and drove back to the city, my mind racing. I had what I needed to keep myself safe, but now I had to play this smart. One wrong move and this file wouldn't just be my insurance, it'd be my death warrant. I kept the file close, hidden away where no one would find it. In the meantime, I needed to bide my time, keep things calm on the surface while I figured out my next move. Vito was right. I couldn't afford to draw any more heat. But now, with this dirt, I had something they couldn't ignore. I just needed to figure out the best way to use it. Over the next couple of weeks, I kept things running smooth, doing what I could to stay under the radar. The family was watching me closely, guys like Angelo and Sal, the old-school types who didn't like the way I was rising through the ranks. They were loyal to Vito, but they didn't trust me. They saw me as a threat, someone who could upset the balance of power if I got too ambitious. And I could see it in their eyes every time I walked into a room, the doubt, the suspicion. Rico, though, he stayed solid. He knew about the file, but only parts of it. I didn't trust anyone else with the full picture, not even him. I needed to be careful, and Rico understood that. He was smart enough to know the game we were playing, And he had my back, no questions asked. But there was one person I hadn't heard from since Vito's warning, Vito himself. He'd gone quiet, like he was giving me space to figure things out. Or maybe he was watching, waiting to see if I'd screw up and make his decision easier. Either way, I knew I had to get to him before anyone else did. If there was anyone who could help me navigate this mess, it was Vito. One night, after laying low for weeks, I decided to pay Vito a visit. I needed to let him know that I wasn't just sitting on my hands, I had a plan. I needed him to understand that I wasn't going down without a fight, and I had something big that could turn the tables. When I got to his place, though, something felt off. The house was too quiet, the lights dimmer than usual. There were no guards at the door, no sign of the usual foot traffic. I knocked, but no one answered. I knocked again, harder this time, but still nothing. A knot formed in my stomach. Something was wrong. I tried the door. It wasn't locked. That's when the alarms in my head really started blaring. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my hand hovering near my gun, ready for whatever was waiting. The place was dark, shadows stretching across the floor like they were alive. I moved quietly through the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. Vito. He was sitting in his usual chair, but something was wrong. His head was slumped forward, a glass of scotch still in his hand, but the glass wasn't moving. I stepped closer, the dread pooling in my gut, and that's when I saw the blood. It soaked the front of his shirt, a single gunshot wound to the chest. It was clean, professional, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. My blood ran cold as I realized what had happened. Vito was dead. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of it sinking in. Whoever had done this, they weren't just sending a message. They were taking over. Vito was the kingpin, the guy who held everything together, and now he was gone. The family would be in chaos, scrambling for power, and whoever pulled the trigger knew exactly what they were doing. The file, the one I had stashed away, it wasn't just insurance anymore. It was the key to survival. Without Vito, I was a marked man. They would be coming for me next. I needed to move fast. I slipped out of the house, my mind racing. The family would find out soon enough, but I needed to get ahead of it. I called Rico, my voice low and urgent. "Vito's gone," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "He's been hit. We need to meet. Now." Rico didn't ask questions. He just told me where to meet him and hung up. The city felt different that night, colder, darker. I could feel the shift happening, the power vacuum Vito's death had created. Everyone would be vying for control now. Angelo, Sal, anyone who thought they had a shot. And me? I was the biggest target on the board. When I met Rico, I didn't sugarcoat it. "Vito's dead," I told him, pacing back and forth in the small room we'd holed up in. "We're next. They're going to come after us." Rico frowned, his usual calm slipping. "Who did it?" "I don't know yet," I said, running a hand through my hair. "But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we need to get ahead of this. I've got something big. It's leverage. We can use it to buy ourselves time, maybe even flip this whole thing around." Rico nodded, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "What's the play?" I pulled out the file, slapping it down on the table between us. "This. It's got dirt on everyone, judges, cops, politicians. They've all been working together, rigging contracts, laundering money. If we use this right, we can take control. We can make them back off." Rico's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. This is huge, Tony. But it's dangerous. If they find out you have this, they'll come at you harder. They're already coming at me," I said, my voice hard. "This is our only shot. We can't run. We can't hide. We need to hit back, and we need to hit hard." Rico looked up at me, his face set with determination. "All right. Let's do it." We didn't have much time. The power struggle in the family was already beginning, and I could feel the storm brewing. Angelo and Sal were making moves, and it wouldn't be long before they came for me. But I had something they didn't: leverage. And I was going to use it. I knew that Vito's death wasn't just a hit. It was the start of something bigger. The people pulling the strings were making their move, and if I didn't act fast, I'd be swallowed whole by the chaos. But I wasn't going down without a fight. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night. The city buzzed around me as I watched the skyline from the window of my apartment, my mind spinning in every direction. Vito's death had cracked the foundation of everything I knew, and now the walls were closing in faster than I could shore them up. By morning, the news had spread. It was all over the streets, whispers in the corners, conversations cut short when I walked by. Vito, the untouchable, was gone, and everyone was wondering the same thing: who would fill the void? Rico called early. "They're already circling," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Angelo's calling for a meeting at the Raven tonight. It's a power play, Tony. They want to take control before we can even catch our breath." I expected it, but it still made my blood boil. Angelo had been waiting for this moment. He'd been riding Vito's coattails for years, biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to climb to the top. Now, with Vito gone, he saw his chance. "They want me dead, Rico," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "They know I was Vito's guy, and with him gone, they'll be gunning for me. Angelo's not going to sit around and let me stay in the game." "We have the file," Rico reminded me. "We can use it. It's time to make our move." I nodded, pacing back and forth in the small apartment. "I know. But we need to be smart about it. We can't just wave this thing around and expect them to back down. If they realize what we have, they'll try to take us out before we even get a chance to use it. Then what's the plan?" I paused, staring out the window, my mind racing. Angelo was a problem, but he wasn't the only one. There were others, silent players waiting to see how things would shake out. If I could get to them before Angelo made his move, maybe, just maybe, I could shift the balance in my favor. "We need to divide and conquer," I said, turning back to Rico. "Angelo's going to try to unite the family against me. We can't let that happen. We need to get to the key players before he does. Sal, for one. He's been on the fence for years, never fully committing to either side. If we can get him to back us, it'll shake the others' confidence in Angelo." Rico frowned. "Sal's slippery. He'll side with whoever he thinks is winning. Then we make him think we're winning," I said, my voice cold. "We show him the file, just enough to scare him. If he thinks we have the power to take down half the city, he'll have no choice but to back us. And if he doesn't, then he's a loose end," I said simply. "We can't afford loose ends right now." Rico nodded, understanding the weight of my words. "All right. I'll set up a meeting with Sal. But what about Angelo? He's not going to just sit back and let us make our moves." "I'll deal with Angelo," I said, my jaw tightening. "Let him have his meeting at the Raven. We'll make sure we're one step ahead." Rico left to make the arrangements, and I sat back, staring at the file again. It was all in there, everything we needed to turn the tables. But there was something else gnawing at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. Vito's death, the way it happened, it was too clean. Whoever took him out wasn't just sending a message. They were making a statement. And I had a feeling it wasn't just Angelo pulling the strings. I thought back to what Vito had said in our last conversation. The people behind the scenes, the ones we couldn't see. They were still out there, watching, waiting to see how the dust settled. And if they were the ones who'd ordered the hit on Vito, then I was in deeper than I thought. That night, I met Rico at a small bar in the Bronx. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would expect us to meet, quiet, out of the way, a few regulars nursing beers at the bar. We sat in a booth in the back, where the shadows swallowed the conversation. "Sal's agreed to meet," Rico said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Tomorrow afternoon, out by the docks. It's neutral ground. He's nervous, though. Wants to make sure he's not walking into a trap." I smirked. "He's not wrong to be nervous." Rico chuckled darkly. "You want me there?" I shook my head. No, I'll handle Sal. He's skittish enough as it is. If he sees you, he'll think we're trying to corner him. I need him to feel like he's got options. And Angelo? I've got someone keeping an eye on the Raven, I said. Angelo's going to try to make his move tonight. But he won't expect what's coming. Rico raised an eyebrow. What's the plan? I leaned forward, my voice low. I've got a guy on the inside, a bartender who owes me a favor. He's going to make sure the meeting gets interrupted. By who? Cops, I said with a grin. But not just any cops. Dirty ones. The kind Angelo doesn't want to mess with. Rico whistled. You're playing with fire, Tony. I know, I said, my grin fading. But if we're going to survive this, we need to burn the whole thing down. The meeting at the Raven went just as I expected. Angelo showed up with a few of his loyal guys, smug and ready to make his power grab. He didn't waste time, laying it out for everyone there. Vito was gone, and someone needed to take the reins. He made his pitch, talked about loyalty to the family, about keeping things stable in the wake of Vito's death. What he didn't know was that the cops were already on their way, tipped off about some illegal activity happening at the Raven. The bartender, like I said, owed me a favor, and he made sure the call went out at just the right time. When the cops stormed in, Angelo didn't know what hit him. The look on his face must have been priceless, caught in the middle of his big speech, surrounded by half the family, and suddenly he's got NYPD swarming the place, hands on their guns. Of course, Angelo had connections in the police department, but these weren't the kind of cops you could just pay off. They were the ones on the take from the people higher up, the ones we couldn't see, the ones Vito had warned me about. They weren't there to arrest Angelo. They were there to shake him up, to remind him that he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. And it worked. Angelo's crew scattered like roaches, leaving him to deal with the mess. By the time it was over, he'd lost face in front of the family, and that was enough to put a crack in his armor. The next day, I met Sal out by the docks, just like we'd planned. He was nervous, just like Rico said, twitchy, his eyes darting around like he was expecting a bullet any second. But when I showed him the file, his whole demeanor changed. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening as he realized what he was holding. This is... Jesus, Tony. This is enough to bury half the city. Exactly, I said, my voice calm. You back me, Sal, and I'll make sure you come out on top. You try to play both sides, and you'll be buried with the rest of them. He looked up at me, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. Sal was a survivor, always looking for the safest bet. And right now, with Angelo on the ropes and me holding the kind of leverage that could bring down judges and politicians, I was his safest bet. I'm with you, he said finally, his voice steady. But we need to move fast. Angelo's not going to stay down for long. I know, I said, standing up. That's why we're hitting him where it hurts next. Sal raised an eyebrow. And where's that? His money, I said simply. We cut off his cash flow, and he's done. Sal nodded, a sly grin forming on his face. I like the way you think, Tony. Let's do it. As I left the docks that day, I could feel the tide turning in my favor. Angelo had been rattled, and with Sal backing me, I had a real shot at taking control of the family. But I knew it wasn't over yet. The people behind the scenes, the ones who'd killed Vito, were still out there, watching, waiting. And I wasn't done with them. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, whispered conversations, and strategic moves. Sal held up his end of the deal, quietly pulling in his allies, making sure they knew where the real power lay. Angelo's humiliation at the Raven had shaken a lot of people's confidence in him, but I knew better than to think he'd stay down for long. Angelo was like a snake, wounded, but still dangerous. He'd be planning his next move, waiting for the right moment to strike. Meanwhile, I had my sights set on his money. Angelo had been sitting on a fortune for years, funneling cash through a network of businesses and shell corporations. Laundromats, nightclubs, construction companies, they were all fronts, moving dirty money in and out of the system. If I could cut off that flow, he'd have no way to pay his people, no leverage to hold over the family. Sal and I worked quickly, gathering intel from our contacts on the street. It wasn't hard to find the weak links in Angelo's operation. Guys who were loyal to the cash, not to Angelo. A few bribes here, a few threats there, and suddenly we had names, addresses, and bank accounts. Rico and I sat down one night, laying everything out in front of us. It was like putting together a puzzle, the businesses, the accounts, the flow of money. It all led back to a handful of key players, guys who managed Angelo's finances behind the scenes. "This is it," I said, pointing to a list of names. "These are the guys running his cash flow. We take them out, and Angelo's finished." Rico leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "You think they'll flip?" "They don't have a choice," I said. "We hit them hard, and they'll fold. Angelo doesn't have the muscle to protect them right now. He's too busy trying to patch things up after the cops hit the Raven. These guys are low-level, scared. We make them an offer they can't refuse." Rico smirked at the old phrase. "Just like the movies, huh?" "Exactly," I said, standing up. "Except this isn't a movie, and there's no happy ending for Angelo." We moved fast, hitting each of Angelo's money men one by one. Some of them were easy to sway, a little cash in the right hands, and they were more than willing to switch sides. Others needed more convincing, but that's where Rico came in. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, and the message was clear: back Angelo, and you end up in a ditch. Back us, and you stay alive. Within a week, we had control of Angelo's entire financial network. His cash flow dried up almost overnight. His people, those who weren't already on our payroll, started jumping ship, looking for safer ground. Word spread quickly that Angelo was bleeding, and it wasn't long before the rest of the family took notice. But Angelo wasn't stupid. He knew what was happening, and he wasn't going to let me take everything without a fight. I got word from one of my guys that he was planning something big, a hit designed to take me out once and for all. I wasn't surprised. It was the only move he had left. But I wasn't going to wait around for him to make it. One night I got a call from Sal. "Tony, we need to talk. There's something you need to know." I could hear the tension in his voice, the kind that told me this wasn't just another routine conversation. "What is it?" "It's Angelo," Sal said, his voice low. "He's not working alone. He's got backing, serious backing." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I'm talking about the big players, Tony. The guys behind the scenes, the ones Vito always warned us about. They're pulling the strings now. They're the ones who took out Vito, and now they're backing Angelo." For a second, I didn't say anything, letting Sal's words sink in. I'd suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of cold dread through me. "Why Angelo?" I asked, my voice tight. "Because he's weak," Sal said. "They can control him. They're using him as a puppet, someone to keep the family in line while they take over." I gripped the phone tighter. This was worse than I thought. Angelo wasn't just some rival gunning for control. He was a pawn in a much bigger game. The real power players, the ones who'd taken out Vito, were making their move, and Angelo was just their puppet. "We can't let that happen," I said, my voice hard. "We need to take Angelo out before they tighten their grip on the family." "I know," Sal said. "But it's not going to be easy. They've got resources, connections. If we make a move against Angelo, we'll be fighting them, too." "I'm not scared of a fight," I said, my jaw clenched. "We take down Angelo, and then we deal with whoever's pulling the strings. One step at a time." Sal sighed on the other end of the line. "All right. Just be careful, Tony. These guys, they don't play by the same rules." I hung up and sat in the dark, my mind racing. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. I wasn't just fighting Angelo anymore. I was fighting the unseen forces that had been controlling the game all along. The same ones that had taken out Vito, and the same ones that would come after me if I wasn't careful. I called Rico and told him what Sal had said. He didn't seem surprised. I figured something like this was going on, he said, his voice calm. Vito always talked about those guys, said they were the real threat. Angelo's nothing compared to them. But Angelo's the one we can reach, I said. We take him out, and we send a message. We're not going to roll over for them. Rico nodded. All right. What's the play? We set a trap, I said. Angelo thinks he's coming for me, but we'll be ready. We let him make his move, and then we take him down. It was a risky plan, but it was the only option we had. Angelo was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. If we could lure him into a position where he thought he had the upper hand, we could end this before it spiraled any further out of control. We set the wheels in motion, spreading word through our contacts that I'd be at a meeting on the outskirts of town, a quiet spot, isolated, the kind of place Angelo would think he could pull off a clean hit. In reality, it was a setup. Rico and I would be waiting, along with a small crew of guys we trusted. We'd have the element of surprise on our side. The night of the meeting, I felt the tension in the air. It was the kind of tension that came before something big, something violent. Rico and I got there early, setting up in the shadows, waiting for Angelo to make his move. It wasn't long before we saw the headlights in the distance, cutting through the darkness. A couple of cars, no more than I expected. Angelo wouldn't bring an army. He needed to keep this quiet. He needed it to look like a clean hit, a power shift without too much noise. The cars pulled up, and I saw Angelo step out, flanked by a couple of his guys. They looked nervous, like they knew this wasn't going to be easy. Angelo, though, he was all business, his eyes cold, his face set in a grim mask. I stepped out from the shadows, making sure he saw me. His eyes locked on mine, and I could see the hatred there, the desperation. He knew this was his last shot. You made a mistake coming here, Tony, Angelo called out, his voice echoing in the still night air. Should have stayed in your place. I smirked, stepping forward. You're the one who made the mistake, Angelo. You never understood the game. His face twisted in anger, and that's when it happened. Shots rang out, sharp and sudden, and the quiet night erupted into chaos. The gunfire echoed through the night like a thunderstorm rolling over the horizon, each shot cutting through the still air with deadly precision. I ducked behind the rusted metal of a nearby abandoned car, feeling the force of bullets pinging off its surface. The ambush had begun just as I'd planned, but there was always that rush of uncertainty when the first shots rang out. Plans were nice on paper, but once the bullets started flying, nothing was guaranteed. Angelo's men scattered, trying to find cover behind whatever they could. I could see the panic in their movements, the confusion of being caught off guard. Rico and our guys held the higher ground, positioned perfectly to rain hell down on Angelo's crew. I leaned out, aiming my gun at one of his men as he sprinted toward the tree-ling. One shot, and he crumpled to the ground, disappearing into the shadows. The chaos continued, gunfire lighting up the darkness in short, violent bursts. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. This was what it had all led to. Months of maneuvering, lying, plotting, and now, it all came down to this moment. I saw Angelo darting toward the back of his car, crouching low as he fired blindly in our direction. He wasn't as calm as he'd seemed when he stepped out of that car. Now, he was just another man scrambling to stay alive. And he had to know he was running out of time. I waited for my moment, counting the rhythm of his shots. The instant he paused to reload, I popped up from my cover and fired at him. The bullets missed by inches, pinging off the asphalt near his feet, but it was enough to make him stumble backward in fear. Tony! He yelled, his voice desperate now, echoing across the empty space. This doesn't have to end like this. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Angelo, who'd been planning to put a bullet in my head tonight, suddenly wanted to talk? But I wasn't interested in his words. This was the end of the line for him, and we both knew it. I motioned to Rico, who nodded and signaled for our guys to stop firing. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the heavy breathing, the scuffle of shoes on gravel, the tension crackling like static electricity. I stood up slowly, gun in hand, and stepped out from behind the car. Angelo was crouched low, clutching his side where a bullet had grazed him. He looked up at me, his face pale, sweat dripping down his forehead. "You're finished, Angelo," I said, my voice cold, devoid of emotion. "This is your last move." He shook his head, wincing as he stood up. "You don't get it, Tony. This isn't just about us anymore. There are bigger players in this game. If you take me out, they're going to come for you." I narrowed my eyes, keeping my gun trained on him. "They're already coming for me. Vito's dead because of them, and I'm not stupid enough to think they'll stop at you." "You can't fight them," Angelo said, his voice cracking. "They're too powerful. They control everything: judges, cops, politicians. You'll be signing your death warrant if you keep this up." I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the fear in his eyes. "You should have thought about that before you made your move, Angelo. You're just a pawn to them, and now you're being sacrificed." Angelo's lip quivered, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of desperation in his eyes. He wasn't pleading for his life. He was pleading for time, for a way out that didn't exist. But I wasn't about to give it to him. He raised his gun in one final act of defiance, his hand shaking, aiming it at me. But he was too slow. I squeezed the trigger, and my bullet hit him square in the chest. Angelo gasped, his body jerking backward before crumpling to the ground, the gun slipping from his hand. The echo of the shot faded, and silence settled over the scene. I stared down at Angelo's lifeless body, feeling a strange emptiness wash over me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't victory. It was just hollow. Another body in a long line of bodies. Rico came up beside me, lowering his gun as he looked at Angelo's corpse. "It's done." I nodded, though it didn't feel like the end. Taking out Angelo was just one battle in a much bigger war. The real fight was still ahead. "We need to move fast," I said, my mind already racing ahead. "Angelo's guys are going to scatter, but we need to make sure none of them regroup. Hit them before they even have a chance to think." Rico nodded. "I'll take care of it." I stared down at Angelo's body one last time before turning away. "And send a message to the others. Let them know what happens when they cross me." As we left the scene, I could feel the weight of what I'd just done pressing down on me. Angelo was gone, but the people behind him, the real players, they were still out there, watching, waiting to see what I'd do next. The next day, I woke up to a different kind of tension. The streets were buzzing with the news of Angelo's death. It wasn't long before word got back to the higher-ups, the ones Vito had always warned me about, the ones pulling the strings. I knew it was only a matter of time before they made their next move. I had Sal meet me at a quiet spot in Queens, far from prying eyes. He showed up looking nervous, shifting from foot to foot as he lit a cigarette. "Tony," he said, his voice shaky. "What the hell happened?" "Angelo's dead, and now everyone's talking." "That's what I wanted," I said flatly. "I needed to send a message." Sal exhaled a long puff of smoke, shaking his head. "You don't get it. They're pissed. I'm hearing things, bad things." "Like what?" "Like they're planning to make an example out of you," Sal said, his eyes wide. "They're not happy, Tony. They were using Angelo to keep things in check, and now you've gone and blown that all to hell. They're going to retaliate." I clenched my jaw, feeling the heat of anger rising in my chest. "I'm not scared of them." "Maybe you should be," Sal said, flicking the cigarette to the ground and crushing it under his heel. "These guys aren't like the street-level punks we've been dealing with. They have real power, Tony. The kind of power you can't just shoot your way out of." I crossed my arms, trying to hide the flicker of doubt creeping into my mind. "So what? We just roll over and let them take everything?" Sal sighed, rubbing his face with both hands. "No. But we need to be smart about this. We need to figure out who's pulling the strings and find a way to leverage it. Going in guns blazing isn't going to work with these guys." I hated to admit it, but Sal was right. The people behind Angelo were powerful, and I couldn't afford to underestimate them. But I wasn't about to let them take control without a fight. "What do you suggest?" I asked, my voice low. Sal looked around, making sure no one was watching us. "There's someone we need to talk to. Someone who might know more about what's going on behind the scenes." "Who?" Sal hesitated before answering. "A guy named Lorenzo. He used to work with Vito way back. He's been out of the game for a while, but he still has connections to the people who are pulling the strings now. If anyone knows what's going on, it's him." "Where is he?" Sal shrugged. "That's the tricky part. Last I heard, he went underground after Vito's death. He's paranoid, doesn't trust anyone. But I've got a lead. It'll take some time to track him down." I nodded, feeling a sliver of hope. "Do it. Find him. We need answers, and we need them fast." Sal nodded, turning to leave. "I'll be in touch." As I watched him walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. The people behind Angelo, the real players, they were still out there, waiting to make their move. And I knew that whatever came next was going to be bigger, more dangerous than anything I'd faced before. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. This was my city, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. The days passed in a tense blur, each one more nerve-wracking than the last. I could feel the city pulsing with unease, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation of what would happen next. Angelo's death had sent ripples through the underworld, and I knew the power players were circling like vultures. They were calculating their moves, waiting for the right moment to strike. Sal had been busy tracking down Lorenzo, the old associate of Vito's, and I could tell he was feeling the pressure. He called me late one night, his voice frantic. "Tony, I've got a lead on Lorenzo. But it's not going to be easy. He's in a bad spot, and he's not exactly eager to talk." I leaned back in my chair, a sense of foreboding washing over me. "Where is he?" "He's been living in a rundown neighborhood in the Bronx, mostly keeping to himself. Word is, he's got a small crew he trusts, but they're as jumpy as he is. If we go in hot, he'll bolt before we can even talk to him. Then we need to play this smart," I said, my mind racing. "Let's set up a meeting. I want to make sure he knows we're on his side. He might have information we need." "All right," Sal replied. "I'll reach out to a couple of people who might know how to get to him. But it'll take some time. Lorenzo doesn't just let anyone into his circle. Just make it happen, Sal," I said, trying to keep the urgency out of my voice. "We don't have much time." The following week dragged on, each day blending into the next as I waited for word from Sal. I could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something big was about to break. I spent my nights pacing the floors of my apartment, looking out over the city that had become a chessboard of danger and uncertainty. Finally, on a chilly Friday evening, Sal called me back. "Tony, I've got Lorenzo. He agreed to meet us tomorrow afternoon at a cafe in the Bronx." "Good. Let's keep it low-key. No guns, no muscle, just a conversation," I instructed. Sal hesitated. "You know how these things go, Tony. If he thinks we're trying to set him up, I'm not looking to make an enemy, Sal. I need his trust, especially with the stakes where they are. Just stick to the plan." The next day, I made my way to the cafe, a small, unassuming place tucked away on a quiet street. As I entered, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint aroma of pastries filled the air. I scanned the room, looking for Lorenzo, who had been a ghost for too long. Sal was already there, sitting in a booth toward the back. He nodded as I approached, and I could see the tension etched on his face. "He's here," he said, gesturing discreetly to a man sitting alone at a table, nursing a cup of coffee. Lorenzo was older than I remembered, his face lined with years of worry and distrust. He looked like a man who'd seen too much and survived by keeping to the shadows. I approached cautiously, taking a seat across from him. "Lorenzo," I said, extending my hand. "Thanks for meeting with us." He looked at my hand for a moment before reluctantly shaking it, his grip firm but wary. "What do you want, Tony?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need information. About Angelo and the people he was working with before his death. I have reason to believe there are bigger players involved, and I want to know who they are. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping back into his expression. Why should I help you? You killed Angelo. He was my friend. Angelo was a traitor, I replied, keeping my voice steady. He put his own interests above everything else. I'm not asking you to side with me, I'm asking you to help us both. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. The streets are changing, and if we don't act, we'll all pay the price. He regarded me for a long moment, as if weighing my words. You think you can take down the people behind Angelo? They're untouchable, Tony. They control everything: money, power, influence. You're playing a dangerous game. Every game is dangerous. I shot back. But I've already lost too much. Vito's dead because of them, and I won't let them take me down too. Lorenzo sighed, the weight of his history evident in his eyes. You're right about one thing, Angelo was just a pawn. But those who pull the strings, they don't play fair. If you go after them, you're signing your own death warrant. Maybe so, I said, leaning forward. But I'm willing to take that risk if it means protecting what's left of our family. I need to know everything you can tell me about them. He hesitated again, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally, he relented. All right. I'll tell you what I know. But you need to understand something. You're stepping into a world you don't fully grasp. This is not just about mobsters and street corners. This is business, politics, and blood. He leaned in closer, and I could feel the gravity of what he was about to reveal. There's a group that's been consolidating power in the shadows. They've infiltrated the police, the courts, and even some of the higher-ups in the city. They're all about control, eliminating anyone who threatens their interests. What do they call themselves? I asked, my heart racing. They don't have a name that you'd recognize. They operate through fronts, legitimate businesses that hide their real dealings. But they're the ones who orchestrated Vito's fall. They saw him as a threat to their plans, and they made their move. Who's leading them? I pressed. Lorenzo's expression turned grim. There's a man named Victor Marconi. He's the one pulling the strings. He's not just some low-level thug. He's a businessman, a politician. He has connections that reach far and wide. He's the reason Angelo thought he could play us against each other. I felt a surge of anger. And where can I find him? Lorenzo shook his head, a pained expression crossing his features. It's not that simple, Tony. He's not out in the open. You'll need to tread carefully if you want to get close to him. He's always surrounded by layers of protection, guards, lawyers, and corrupt officials. You need a plan, and you need to be prepared for the worst. Trust me, I said. I'm ready for anything. Lorenzo nodded slowly, his expression softening. You're determined, I'll give you that. But be careful. Marconi doesn't play games. If he thinks you're a threat, he'll make sure you disappear. Thanks for the warning, I said, standing up. But I've dealt with threats before. I'm not backing down. As we left the cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had a name, a target, Victor Marconi. But I also felt a shiver of dread. This wasn't just about taking down a rival. This was about stepping into a world of darkness that I couldn't fully comprehend. Back at my apartment, I sat at the table with Sal, poring over everything Lorenzo had told me. Marconi, Sal repeated, the name heavy in the air. This guy sounds dangerous. He is, I replied, tapping my fingers on the table. But we can't let fear stop us. We need to find out everything we can about him and his operations. If we want to take him down, we have to be smarter than him. What's the plan? Sal asked, leaning in. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. We need to get intel on Marconi's business dealings, his connections, anything that can give us leverage. But we also need to build our own alliances. If we want to take him down, we can't do it alone. Sal nodded, his eyes lighting up with the prospect of action. I know a couple of guys who might be able to help. They're good at digging up dirt. Set it up, I said, determination surging through me. We need to move fast. Marconi's not going to wait for us to make our next move. As Sal made the calls, I felt the tension return, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The stakes were high, and I knew that every move we made from here on out could be our last. But I also felt a fire igniting within me. This was my chance to reclaim my power, to fight back against the forces that threatened everything I cared about. We were on the edge of something big, and I was ready to dive headfirst into the chaos. Marconi had no idea what was coming for him, and I wasn't about to let him pull the strings any longer. The following weeks turned into a whirlwind of planning, scheming, and gathering intel. The city felt alive with tension as we moved through its underbelly, picking up pieces of information about Victor Marconi and the empire he controlled. Every alleyway, every dimly lit bar became a source of whispers, each connection adding a thread to the web we were trying to unravel. Sal had reached out to some contacts who were willing to help us dig deeper into Marconi's operation. They were the kind of guys who knew the street as well as they knew the back rooms of high-rise offices. One of them, a wiry man named Frankie, had once worked as a clerk in the city's business registry. He had a knack for tracking down financial records and unearthing dirty laundry. "Tony," Frankie said one evening, flipping through a stack of files spread across my dining table, "Marconi's got a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. Real estate, nightclubs, shipping, he's everywhere." I leaned over the papers, my eyes scanning the numbers. "What about his connections? Who's backing him?" Frankie hesitated, rubbing his chin. "It's hard to say. He's smart. He doesn't put everything out there. But from what I've pieced together, he's got ties to some politicians and even a couple of judges. That's how he's been able to keep things under wraps. If anyone tries to cross him, they face consequences. So we need to find a way to break that network," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "If we can expose his connections, we can turn the heat up on him. He won't be able to hide behind his allies anymore." Sal chimed in. "What about the clubs? I hear he runs a couple of them in the city. If we could get in there, see how he operates." "Good idea," I agreed, rubbing my hands together. "But we'll need to be careful. We can't just waltz in there and expect to gather intel. We need a plan." Frankie nodded. "I can help with that. I've got a friend who works security at one of the clubs. If we can get in under the radar, he might be able to give us access to the back rooms, maybe even some paperwork. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing." "Let's do it," I said, a sense of urgency flooding through me. "Set it up. We need to make our move before Marconi realizes we're onto him." The night of our operation, I felt a knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. The club was one of Marconi's hotspots, a place where the elite mingled with the underbelly of the city. Neon lights flickered outside, casting a vibrant glow on the sidewalk as patrons lined up to get in. The bass from the music thumped like a heartbeat, thrumming through my chest as we approached. Frankie led the way, his demeanor calm and collected. He had a plan, and I trusted him. We walked past the line of clubgoers, and Frankie flashed his security badge to the doorman, who nodded us through without a second glance. The moment we stepped inside, the noise enveloped us, a cacophony of laughter, clinking glasses, and the pulse of the DJ's set. We moved through the crowd, the lights flashing around us like a strobe, creating an electric atmosphere. I could feel the tension in my muscles. Every shadow felt like a potential threat, every pair of eyes scanning for trouble. But I forced myself to focus, determined to stay sharp. Frankie led us to a side door that opened into a dimly lit hallway. "This way," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "The back offices are just up ahead. We need to be quick." As we crept down the hallway, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The stakes were high, and the knowledge that Marconi could be watching sent a chill down my spine. But I pushed it aside. I had a job to do. We reached a door marked "Staff Only." Frankie knocked lightly before pushing it open. The room inside was small and cluttered, filled with old furniture, paperwork strewn about haphazardly, and a couple of guys lounging in the corner, looking bored. "Hey, fellas," Frankie said, trying to sound casual. "Just checking in." One of the guys, a beefy man with a tattoo creeping up his neck, squinted at us. "Who's the new guy?" "Just a friend of mine. He's here to help with some security stuff," Frankie replied. "Nothing to worry about." The guy didn't seem convinced, but he shrugged it off. "Whatever. Just keep it quiet in here." Frankie gestured for me and Sal to start looking through the papers scattered around the desk while he distracted the others. I flipped through stacks of invoices and receipts, trying to make sense of the chaos. Most of it was mundane, orders for supplies, shift schedules, but there were a few documents that caught my eye. "Sal," I whispered, pointing to a file labeled "Financial Statements. This could be it." He leaned over, his brow furrowing as he studied the contents. "This looks like a lot of money changing hands. We might be able to trace some of this back to Marconi's bigger operations." Just as we began to dig deeper, the tension in the room shifted. I heard a sudden commotion outside, voices raised in anger. I exchanged a glance with Sal, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell is going on?" Frankie asked, his expression turning serious. Before anyone could answer, the door swung open, and a figure filled the doorway. It was a woman, striking and assertive, with dark hair cascading around her shoulders. She was dressed sharply, exuding confidence and authority. "Frankie," she said, her voice steady, "what are you doing here? You know you're not supposed to bring outsiders into this area." Frankie froze, caught off guard. I was just... "Get your shit together," she snapped. "Marconi wants a full security report by the end of the night, and I need to know what's going on." Her eyes flicked to me and Sal, assessing us quickly. I felt exposed under her gaze, but I held my ground, forcing myself to appear unperturbed. "This is just a security check," Frankie stammered. "No problems." The woman didn't look convinced. "We're not supposed to have any interruptions tonight. You know that. Get out of here before I report you." Panic surged through me. We couldn't afford to get caught, not now. I shot a glance at Sal, who nodded slightly, his face tense. We needed to leave, and fast. "Let's go," I whispered, signaling for Sal to follow me as I stepped back toward the door. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Hey! You can't just..." I didn't wait for her to finish. I bolted out the door, heart racing, with Sal and Frankie hot on my heels. The sounds of the club filled my ears as we pushed through the crowd, desperation fueling our escape. "Go, go!" Frankie urged, leading us toward the exit. I could feel the woman's gaze burning into my back, but I didn't dare look back. I focused on getting out, the thrill of the chase sending adrenaline surging through me. We burst outside into the cool night air, our breath visible in the streetlights. The club's neon lights faded behind us, and I glanced around, trying to shake the feeling of being hunted. "Did she recognize you?" I asked, my heart pounding. Frankie shook his head. "I don't think so, but we need to lay low. Marconi's not going to take this lightly." We hurried down the block, keeping our voices low. "We need to regroup," I said. "Find a safe place to lay low until we can figure out our next move." "Let's head to my place," Sal suggested. "We can lay low there for a while." I nodded, my mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. We were on the edge of a bigger fight than I'd anticipated, and Marconi wasn't just going to sit back and let us dig into his operations. He would retaliate, and I needed to be ready. As we walked through the streets, I felt the weight of the city pressing down on me. This wasn't just about taking down Marconi anymore. It was about survival. I had stepped into a world that was darker and more dangerous than I had ever imagined, and there was no turning back now. When we reached Sal's place, I sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over me. "We need to lay low for a while and gather more intel," I said, rubbing my temples. "We can't go back to the club. Marconi will be looking for us." Frankie nodded, pulling out his phone. "I'll reach out to some contacts. We can't let this die down. We need to keep the pressure on." I glanced around the room, my mind racing. What about the woman? We need to find out who she is and what her role is in all of this. Sal shrugged. I'll ask around. She looked important, probably one of Marconi's right-hand people. If we can get intel on her, we might find a way to exploit the cracks in Marconi's armor. I leaned back, my thoughts churning. The stakes were higher than ever, and I knew that we had to tread carefully. Every step we took could bring us. After our narrow escape from Marconi's club, I felt the shadows of anxiety creeping into my mind. We had stirred the pot, and I knew the repercussions were imminent. We settled into a routine of surveillance and gathering intel, always on edge, always cautious. My heart was heavy with the knowledge that we had crossed the line, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Marconi would retaliate soon. The days turned into a blur of late nights and early mornings, poring over financial records and connecting dots that were scattered across the city's underbelly. The three of us, Sal, Frankie, and I, had become a tight-knit unit, bonded by a common goal and the looming threat of danger. We would meet at Sal's apartment, surrounded by dim lighting and the flicker of old neon signs filtering in through the windows. One night, as we sat around the table littered with papers, I noticed Frankie staring intently at a document. "Guys," he said, breaking the silence, "I think I might have found something important." Sal and I leaned closer, intrigued. "What is it?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "It's about a shipment," Frankie explained, flipping the paper around to show us. "It's scheduled to come in next week at the docks. It looks like it's part of Marconi's operation, a lot of cash and some high-end merchandise." "High-end merchandise?" I echoed, curiosity piqued. "What are we talking about?" "Luxury cars, jewelry, you name it. All smuggled in under the radar." Frankie's fingers traced the numbers on the page. "This could be our chance to expose Marconi's operation and make a serious dent in his business." Sal's eyes glinted with interest. "If we can gather evidence during the shipment, we might finally have something we can use against him. But it'll be risky," I cautioned, weighing the potential fallout. "We need to be smart about this. If we get caught, it'll be game over for us." Frankie nodded. "We can't just burst in there. We need to plan, find out how the operation works, and figure out how we can blend in." "All right," I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "Let's do it. But we need to have a solid plan in place. We'll scout the docks, find out who's working there, and see if we can get some inside help." The next few days were a whirlwind of covert operations. We split up, taking different shifts to keep an eye on the docks. Each night, I found myself sitting in the shadows, hidden behind crates and barrels, watching the activity unfold. The sound of water slapping against the docks mixed with the distant laughter of revelers at nearby bars created an odd sense of normalcy amidst the tension. As I observed, I began to notice a pattern. Each night, a group of men dressed in black showed up around the same time, overseeing the unloading of large containers from shipping vessels. They were sharp and efficient, moving with a sense of urgency that hinted at their connection to something much larger. I realized they were the muscle, Marconi's enforcers, and they weren't to be messed with. One night, while I was hiding behind some stacked crates, I caught sight of a familiar face. It was the woman from the club, the one who had confronted Frankie. I felt a chill run down my spine. She was not just a lackey, she was a key player in Marconi's operation. I quickly snapped a few photos with my phone, careful to keep my presence hidden. If I could gather enough evidence to show that she was involved, it could give us leverage. I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. The stakes were higher than ever. After another long night of surveillance, I met with Sal and Frankie at our usual spot. "I've got something," I announced, showing them the photos I had taken. Frankie studied the images closely, his brow furrowing. "That's her. I didn't think she'd be involved in the shipping operations. We need to find out what her role is. She could be a gold mine of information." Sal nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "If we can figure out how to approach her, we might be able to flip her to our side. Get her to turn against Marconi." "Yeah, but how?" I asked, skepticism creeping into my thoughts. We can't just walk up to her and ask for a chat. She'll see us coming from a mile away. Frankie scratched his chin, thinking, what if we stage an incident? Something that draws her attention and gives us a chance to talk without her suspecting anything? I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. If we create a distraction, something that makes it look like we're targeting Marconi's operation, she might see us as potential allies instead of threats. We could use that to get close to her. Sal's eyes lit up. I like it. But we need to be smart about this. We have to make sure it doesn't blow back on us. We spent the next few nights brainstorming the details. We came up with a plan that involved faking a heist, enough to catch her attention but not so much that it would attract the police or Marconi's men. It was risky, but the potential payoff could be enormous. As we executed the plan, I felt a mix of fear and excitement coursing through me. We set up shop a few blocks away from the docks, keeping an eye on the operations while waiting for the right moment. The tension was palpable as we watched the men move in and out, loading and unloading. Then it happened. As a large truck pulled in to pick up a shipment, we sprang into action. I and Sal created a diversion, throwing rocks at the shipping containers and making a commotion that drew the attention of the guards. I could see her watching from a distance, her expression shifting from confusion to interest. The chaos unfolded, and I saw the opportunity we'd been waiting for. As the guards moved to investigate, I made my way toward her, heart pounding. Hey! I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. She turned, eyes narrowing as she assessed me. Who are you? Someone who knows what's really going on here, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Marconi is playing you. He's using you as a pawn in a much bigger game. Her expression hardened. You think you can just come in here and threaten me? No, I'm not threatening you, I insisted, urgency spilling from my lips. I'm offering you a chance to turn the tables. We know what he's doing, and we want to help you take him down. But we need your help. For a moment, she hesitated, weighing her options. I could see the gears turning in her mind as she considered my words. Why should I trust you? Because we're in the same boat, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. If we don't stop him, we're all going to end up in the same place, either in jail or worse. I can help you find a way out of this. She studied me, her expression inscrutable. You're bold, I'll give you that. But if you're lying, I'll make sure you regret it. Fair enough, I replied, relief flooding through me. We can meet and discuss how we can bring him down. We have intel that can help us both. All right, she said, crossing her arms. But you need to prove that you're not just another pawn in Marconi's game. Meet me tomorrow night at the Rusty Nail. Come alone, and I'll consider it. With that, she turned and slipped back into the shadows, leaving me with a mix of hope and dread. I couldn't believe how close we had gotten, but now it was time to seal the deal. I knew that the stakes were higher than ever, and there was no turning back now. Back at Sal's apartment, I filled him and Frankie in on what had just happened. She agreed to meet me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I have to go alone. Sal's eyes widened. Are you crazy? You're walking into the lion's den. What if this is a trap? I don't think it is, I replied, my conviction strong. I think she's looking for a way out just like we are. But if I bring you two along, it could blow everything up. Frankie rubbed his temples, clearly conflicted. You're right, but you need to be careful. This could turn dangerous fast. I know, I replied, trying to suppress the storm of nerves churning in my gut. But I have to take this chance. It's the best lead we've had so far. The rest of the night was a blur of anxious anticipation. I paced the apartment, running through potential scenarios in my mind. I had no idea if this woman would turn out to be an ally or if I was walking straight into a trap, but the risk was worth it. If I could gain her trust, it could mean the difference between life and death in this dangerous game we were playing. The next evening, I found myself standing outside the Rusty Nail, the neon sign flickering above me like a beacon. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. This was a pivotal moment, a crossroads that could change everything. I pushed through the door, stepping into the dimly lit bar. I stepped inside the rusty nail, the familiar scent of aged wood and spilled beer enveloping me like a thick fog. The atmosphere was dim, punctuated by soft laughter and the clinking of glasses. I glanced around, spotting her seated at a secluded table in the corner. Her dark hair framed her face, casting shadows that enhanced her intensity. Taking a deep breath, I approached the table, feeling the weight of my decision settle in my chest. She looked up, her expression unreadable, and gestured for me to sit. "You came alone," she said, her tone a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "I told you I would," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm here to help, but we need to be honest with each other. Honesty is hard to come by in this business," she said, leaning back, studying me carefully. "You have one chance to prove you're different." I nodded, determined. "I know what Marconi is doing, and I've been gathering intel. I want to help you get out from under his thumb. You don't have to be his pawn anymore." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were weighing my words. "What do you know about Marconi's operation?" "Enough to know that he's playing both sides," I said. "He's got people in the police department, in the city council. He's untouchable. But we have a chance to turn that around if we work together." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze penetrating as she considered my offer. "Why should I trust you? You could be just another thug looking to climb the ranks." "I'm not," I insisted. "I'm in this because I want to see Marconi taken down. He's dangerous, and he's hurt too many people. If we can expose him, it won't just free you. It could disrupt his entire operation." She studied me, and I could feel the tension in the air crackle with unspoken words. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice lowering. "Just your help," I replied earnestly. "We need inside information, and if you can provide that, we can use it to our advantage. You'll be safe, and we'll make sure Marconi pays for what he's done." After what felt like an eternity, she leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "All right. But know this, if I sense any betrayal, I won't hesitate to make you regret it." I nodded, a mix of relief and exhilaration flooding through me. "Fair enough. We're on the same side for now. Let's talk strategy." We spent the next few hours discussing Marconi's operations, outlining his supply routes, and pinpointing key players in his organization. Each detail she revealed peeled back another layer of the criminal network that had gripped the city in fear. The conversation flowed naturally as we plotted and planned. There was a palpable chemistry between us, an understanding that transcended our circumstances. It felt like I was sitting across from someone who had been fighting the same battles as I had, someone who understood the stakes involved. As the night wore on, I began to see her not just as a potential ally but as a person who had suffered under Marconi's reign. She spoke of friends lost to violence, of dreams crushed by the weight of the underworld. Her passion ignited a fire in me, and I felt a growing desire to see this through, not just for my sake but for hers and for everyone who had been victimized by Marconi. "Let's meet again tomorrow night," I suggested as we finished our drinks. "We can go over the details and set a plan in motion. The sooner we act, the better." She nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll be here. But we need to be careful. Marconi has eyes everywhere." "I understand," I said, feeling the adrenaline kick in again. "I'll make sure no one follows me." As I left the rusty nail, the city felt different, charged with a sense of possibility. I had taken a risk by approaching her, but it had paid off. Now, with a solid plan beginning to form, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer just a bystander in this fight. I was part of something bigger. The next day, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the city. I met with Sal and Frankie at our usual spot to update them on the progress. "I think we've got a real shot at this," I said, excitement bubbling in my chest. "She's willing to help us gather intel, and she knows a lot about Marconi's operations." Sal's eyes widened. "That's great news. What's the next step?" "We need to finalize our plan for the operation," I explained. "I'll meet her tonight, and we'll go over the details." The goal is to gather enough evidence to expose Marconi and his network. Frankie grinned. This could change everything. If we can get enough dirt on him, the police will have no choice but to act. Exactly, I said, feeling the energy in the room shift. But we have to be cautious. We can't let our guard down, especially now. As the day progressed, we mapped out potential strategies and contingency plans, our excitement infectious. We could finally see a way out of this mess, a chance to dismantle Marconi's empire and bring him to justice. As evening approached, I made my way back to the Rusty Nail, my heart pounding with anticipation. I arrived early, wanting to be prepared for whatever might happen. I settled into a corner booth, watching the crowd ebb and flow, anxiety buzzing in my veins. Finally, she arrived, sliding into the booth opposite me. "You're on time," she noted, a slight smile breaking through her serious demeanor. "That's a good sign. I always keep my word," I replied, returning her smile. "Shall we get started?" She nodded, pulling out a notebook filled with notes and sketches of Marconi's operations. "I've outlined everything I know about his supply routes and key players. We need to focus on the shipment coming in next week. It's going to be the biggest one yet." As she spoke, I felt a growing sense of determination. We were building something, an alliance, a shared purpose, and a vision for a future free from Marconi's grip. I could see the hope in her eyes, and it mirrored my own. Hours passed as we strategized, our voices low and urgent, the weight of our mission palpable. With each detail she revealed, it became clearer that we were on the cusp of something monumental. "Once we have enough evidence, we'll take it to the police," I said, running a hand through my hair. "They can't ignore us if we have concrete proof of Marconi's crimes." She leaned forward, her eyes shining with conviction. "And if we succeed, it won't just be about bringing him down. It will show everyone that they don't have to live in fear anymore." The fire in her words ignited something in me, a resolve to see this through to the end. We were on the brink of change, and I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. As we finalized our plan, I realized I was no longer just fighting for myself. I was fighting for her, for all the people who had suffered at Marconi's hands, and for a future where they could reclaim their lives. By the time we finished, the bar was starting to empty, and I felt a sense of camaraderie that I hadn't anticipated. "We're in this together," I said, meeting her gaze. "I won't let you down." "You already haven't," she replied softly, a warmth blooming between us. The connection we shared felt electric, and as we left the Rusty Nail, I realized that my life was shifting in ways I hadn't expected. I had found not only a partner in this battle but a kindred spirit. With the plan in motion and a clear goal ahead of us, I felt an invigorating sense of purpose. The road ahead would be fraught with danger, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. As we walked down the quiet streets, the weight of uncertainty began to lift. We were ready to face whatever came next, and I knew that together, we could rewrite the narrative. The next few days flew by in a whirlwind of preparation and tension. Our plan was taking shape, and I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety coursing through my veins. Every moment felt like a ticking clock, the deadline for Marconi's shipment looming closer. I met with Sal and Frankie regularly to update them on my discussions with her, whom I'd started to call Mia. She was proving to be invaluable, feeding us intel and insights that deepened our understanding of Marconi's network. Her knowledge about the intricacies of the operation was astonishing, and the more I learned, the more I understood just how deep Marconi's roots ran in the city. On one of our meetings, Sal laid out a map of the docks on the table. "We need to be positioned here," he said, pointing to a spot near where the shipment would arrive. "This will give us a vantage point to see what's coming in." "Right," I agreed, looking at the map. "But we also need to consider security. Marconi's guys won't just let anyone stroll in and out. We have to plan for that." Frankie chimed in. "What if we create a distraction? Something that draws their attention away from us while we gather evidence." "Good idea," I replied. "But we need to keep it simple and low-key. We can't afford to draw too much attention to ourselves." As the days turned into a blur of sleepless nights, we executed our plan with precision. Mia and I worked closely together, rehearsing every detail, ensuring we had contingencies for every possible scenario. Our bond deepened with each late-night strategy session, and I found myself increasingly drawn to her. There was a fierce determination in her eyes, a fire that mirrored my own, and it fueled my resolve to see this through. On the day of the shipment, the tension in the air was palpable. We arrived early at the docks, disguises on, hearts racing. Mia was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, a simple outfit that masked her identity. I could tell she was nervous but excited. I felt the same way. As we positioned ourselves near the entrance, I glanced around, taking in the chaos of the docks. Men were moving containers, shouting orders, and the whole operation had an energy that was both intimidating and thrilling. I spotted several of Marconi's enforcers, recognizable by their matching jackets and tense expressions, patrolling the area with hawk-like vigilance. "All right," I whispered to Mia as we crouched behind some crates. "Let's stick to the plan. We need to wait for the shipment to come in before we make our move." She nodded, her eyes darting around, scanning for any signs of danger. "I'll keep an eye on the entrance. If anything feels off, we need to bail immediately." We waited, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours, tension mounting with each passing second. Finally, the distant sound of a truck engine drew our attention. It rumbled through the gates, and my heart raced as the massive vehicle came to a halt. This was it, the moment we had been preparing for. I motioned to Mia, and we edged closer, keeping ourselves hidden behind the stacks of crates. The back of the truck swung open, revealing a trove of goods, luxury items, bags of cash, and what appeared to be high-end electronics. This was a significant haul, and I felt a rush of adrenaline as I pulled out my phone to capture evidence. "This is it," I whispered to Mia, snapping photos of the merchandise being unloaded. "We're finally getting the proof we need." But just as I was about to take another picture, a loud crash echoed through the docks. My heart sank as I turned to see a group of men in black jackets rushing toward us, shouting angrily. "Hey! You two! Get back here!" Panic surged through me. "Mia, we need to move!" I said, grabbing her arm as we darted behind the crates. The enforcers were closing in fast, and the chaos of the moment sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. We ducked low, hearts pounding, as the men scoured the area. "This wasn't part of the plan," Mia hissed, glancing around frantically. "I know," I replied, my mind racing as I tried to formulate an escape route. "We can't let them catch us." With the men still searching, I grabbed Mia's hand and pulled her toward a narrow alley that cut between the stacks of crates. We ran, adrenaline pushing us faster, the sounds of shouting and chaos echoing behind us. Just as we reached the end of the alley, I spotted a side exit that led to the street. "This way!" I yelled, pulling her along as we burst through the door, emerging into the open air. We skidded to a halt, taking a moment to catch our breath. The streets were busy, and I quickly looked around, scanning for any sign of the enforcers following us. "We should split up," I said, my mind racing. "It'll be harder for them to track us if we go in different directions." Mia nodded, her expression fierce but worried. "Be careful, okay? I'll meet you at Sal's place later." "Same to you," I replied, a rush of concern flooding my chest. "Just stay low and stay safe." With one last glance at her, I turned and headed down the street, my heart racing. I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through me, but there was also a sense of urgency to regroup and figure out our next move. As I navigated through the crowd, I spotted a nearby alley and ducked into it, avoiding any further attention. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed Sal's number. "Come on, pick up," I muttered, willing him to answer. "Hello?" Sal's voice crackled through the line. "Sal, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We had a close call at the docks. Marconi's men were there, and they almost caught us." "What the hell? Are you okay?" he asked, concern lacing his tone. "I'm fine, but we need to regroup. We need to figure out how to proceed without blowing our cover. Mia and I got some good intel, but we didn't get everything we wanted." Let's meet at the safe house, Sal replied. We'll lay low until we know what Marconi's next move is. Stay sharp, and don't draw attention to yourself. I ended the call, feeling a mix of anxiety and relief. I knew I couldn't let this setback discourage me. We were too close to achieving our goal. I made my way to the safe house, moving cautiously through the bustling streets. Once inside, I felt a moment of reprieve as I closed the door behind me. The dimly lit room felt safe, a cocoon away from the chaos of the outside world. Sal and Frankie were already waiting, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. What happened? Frankie asked, eyes wide. I relayed the story, detailing the close call we had at the docks and how we'd managed to escape. We need to be more cautious from now on, I said, running a hand through my hair. Marconi knows we're onto him, and he won't take it lightly. Sal nodded, his expression grave. We need to change our approach. If they're watching the docks, we might have to look for another angle to gather evidence. What about Mia? Frankie asked. Do we know if she's safe? She should be okay, I replied, trying to quell the worry gnawing at my gut. We agreed to meet up later, but we can't count on that. If Marconi's men are searching for us, they might come looking for her too. We spent the rest of the evening plotting our next moves. We reviewed the information Mia had shared, looking for weaknesses in Marconi's operation. My mind kept drifting back to her fierce determination, the way she had fought for a chance at freedom. I knew I had to protect her at all costs. As the night wore on, we solidified our strategy. Tomorrow, we need to split up and hit the streets, I said, determination threading through my voice. We can gather intel from different sources, see if anyone knows about Marconi's shipments. Sal and Frankie agreed, and we decided to lay low for a few days. But as I settled into bed that night, I couldn't shake the sense of unease. The stakes had never been higher, and I knew that we were walking a fine line between danger and success. I fell into a restless sleep, my mind filled with thoughts of Mia and the battle that lay ahead. We were in this together, and I felt a surge of determination to see it through, no matter the cost. As dawn broke, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The fight against Marconi was far from over, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The time to act was now. The sun rose over the city, casting a golden glow that felt almost surreal against the darkness of what was to come. As I prepared for the day ahead, the weight of our mission pressed heavily on my shoulders. Today was not just another day. It was the day we would confront Marconi and his empire once and for all. Mia arrived early at the safe house, her expression a mix of determination and unease. I spoke to a few contacts last night, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. We have a location for where Marconi plans to distribute the goods from the shipment we spotted. My heart raced as I listened, the puzzle pieces of our plan falling into place. Where is it? I asked, leaning in closer. An abandoned warehouse by the docks. He's using it as a drop-off point, and from what I gathered, he'll be there today with his men to oversee everything, she replied, her eyes shining with purpose. We need to get there before he does, I said, adrenaline surging through me. If we can intercept them and gather enough evidence, we can finally take him down. We rallied Sal and Frankie, sharing Mia's intel and finalizing our plan. We'll approach from the back entrance, I instructed, laying out the details on the table. We need to be quick and quiet, get the evidence, and leave before anyone knows we're there. Frankie looked at me, concern etched on his face. And what if things go south? Marconi's men won't go down without a fight. I took a deep breath, knowing the risks involved. We'll have to be ready for anything. But this is our best shot. If we succeed, we can finally bring him to justice. With the plan in place, we set out, tension humming in the air as we drove toward the docks. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless rhythm that matched the urgency of our mission. As we approached the warehouse, I could see a few of Marconi's men loitering outside, their body language tense, watchful. Let's park a few blocks away and approach on foot, I suggested. We can sneak in through the back. Once parked, we made our way to the warehouse, keeping low and silent. The closer we got, the more my adrenaline kicked in, sharpening my senses and heightening my awareness of every sound. We slipped through the back entrance, the dim light filtering in through the cracks in the walls, casting eerie shadows that danced around us. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air was heavy with the scent of stale oil and decay, but I pushed those sensations aside, focusing on the task at hand. We moved cautiously through the space, scanning for any sign of Marconi or his men. "Over there!" Mia whispered, pointing to a group of figures huddled in the corner. They were inspecting the shipment, and I could see stacks of cash and goods piled high. My heart raced at the sight. This was the evidence we needed. I reached for my phone, carefully snapping photos of the scene, capturing everything we could use against Marconi. But just as I was about to take another shot, the sound of footsteps echoed behind us. My heart dropped. "Did you hear that?" Sal murmured, his eyes wide with alarm. Before I could respond, the warehouse door swung open, and in walked Marconi himself, flanked by his enforcers. The room grew still as his presence filled the space, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. "Get ready," I whispered, adrenaline flooding my system. "We need to move." But it was too late. One of the enforcers spotted us, and before I could react, he shouted, "Hey! Get them!" Chaos erupted as Marconi's men charged toward us. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Nia's hand as we sprinted for the exit, the sounds of shouting and crashing echoing behind us. We ducked and weaved through the warehouse, adrenaline surging as we tried to escape. I could hear the footsteps closing in, the urgency of the moment pushing us to move faster. "This way!" I shouted, leading Nia toward a side door that led outside. As we burst through the door, the bright daylight hit us like a wave. We ran down the alley, the sounds of pursuit hot on our heels. "Where do we go?" Mia shouted, fear evident in her voice. "Back to the car," I replied, my mind racing as I scanned our surroundings. We rounded a corner, desperate for an escape route, but Marconi's men were closing in fast. Just as we reached the street, I saw Sal and Frankie waiting by the car, their expressions a mixture of relief and panic. "Get in!" Sal yelled, and we dove into the vehicle, slamming the doors shut behind us. "Go, go, go!" I shouted, urgency lacing my voice. Sal floored the accelerator, and we shot down the street, leaving the chaos of the warehouse behind us. I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with relief as we escaped, but I knew this wasn't over yet. We regrouped at the safe house, the gravity of what had just happened settling in. "We have to figure out our next move," I said, pacing the room. "Marconi will come after us now, and we need to be ready." Mia was visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. "I got some photos, but I don't know if it'll be enough," she said, anxiety threading through her voice. "We need to take what we have to the police," I replied, determination surging through me. "We can't let Marconi continue to operate. We have to expose him, and this is our chance." Sal nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll go together. They won't take us seriously if we go alone. They'll need to see the evidence." As night fell, we prepared to meet with the police, adrenaline still coursing through me as I thought about the risks we were taking. But I knew this was the only way forward. We couldn't let fear dictate our actions any longer. When we arrived at the precinct, we were met with skepticism at first. The officers were hesitant, their faces guarded as they listened to our story. "You expect us to believe that Marconi's men were after you?" one officer asked, crossing his arms. "I have photos," I insisted, pulling out my phone and scrolling through the images. "This is proof of his operation, and we can help you take him down. We can't do this without your support." Slowly, the officers began to take us seriously as they reviewed the evidence. The tension in the room shifted, and I felt a glimmer of hope. "If what you're saying is true, this could be the break we need," one detective said, leaning in closer. We spent hours detailing everything we knew about Marconi, the extent of his operation, and the dangers we had faced. As we spoke, I felt the weight of the world lift slightly off my shoulders. We were no longer just victims, we were fighting back. Finally, the detective looked at us, determination in his eyes. "If you're willing to cooperate, we can set up a sting operation. We'll need you both to play a role in luring Marconi out. It's risky, but if we do this right, we can take him down for good." Mia and I exchanged glances, knowing the gravity of what we were agreeing to. "We're in," I said, my heart pounding. "Whatever it takes." Over the next few days, we worked closely with the police, finalizing plans for the sting. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation as we prepared to face Marconi head-on. I felt a sense of camaraderie with Mia, knowing that we were united in this fight. The day of the operation arrived, and I felt a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. As we set up the meeting with Marconi, I knew that this was our chance to bring him down once and for all. When the moment arrived, everything felt like a blur. We met Marconi at an abandoned warehouse, the setting reminiscent of the chaos we had faced before. He strutted in, flanked by his enforcers, exuding confidence. But this time, we were ready. "Nice to see you again," Marconi sneered, his gaze sharp as he took in our presence. "You think you can outsmart me?" "Not outsmart," I replied, my voice steady. "Just end this." As the operation unfolded, the tension reached a boiling point. The police, hidden and waiting for the signal, were ready to act. As we engaged Marconi in conversation, I felt a rush of adrenaline as I realized this was it, the culmination of everything we had fought for. "Why don't you tell me what you're up to, huh?" Marconi taunted, leaning closer, his expression smug. "Why don't you tell us what you've been doing with all that money?" I shot back, my heart racing. "Your days of terrorizing this city are over." Just as Marconi began to respond, the police burst in, lights flashing, shouting orders. "FBI! You're under arrest!" Panic erupted as Marconi's men scrambled for the exits, but the police had them surrounded. I could hardly breathe as the scene unfolded, the chaos turning to disbelief. Marconi was caught, his empire crumbling before our eyes. As the dust settled and the chaos died down, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had done it. We had taken down one of the most powerful crime lords in the city. As the handcuffs clicked around Marconi's wrists, I felt a rush of satisfaction that I hadn't experienced in a long time. This was it, the end of an era, and the beginning of a new chapter for us. The adrenaline that had been surging through my veins began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sense of triumph. Mia stood beside me, her eyes wide with disbelief and relief. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, we did," I replied, a smile breaking across my face. "We took him down." The police officers worked efficiently, processing Marconi and his men, their expressions a mix of professionalism and exhilaration. Detective Harris, the officer we'd been working with, approached us with a grin. "You two did great. Your cooperation made all the difference." "Thank you for believing in us," I replied, feeling the weight of our journey lift. "I didn't think we'd actually get to this point." "Most people wouldn't," he said, his eyes reflecting a genuine respect. "But you showed real courage. This city needs more people like you." As the scene at the warehouse unfolded, the reality of what we had accomplished began to sink in. We had exposed Marconi's empire, and now, the city would have a chance to heal. The weight of fear that had loomed over us for so long felt like it was dissipating, and for the first time in years, I could see a future free from the shadow of organized crime. Over the next few weeks, the aftermath of our actions rippled through the community. Marconi's arrest sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, and the police began dismantling his operations piece by piece. The news media covered the story extensively, and we became reluctant heroes in our own right. Mia and I spent countless hours discussing our next steps. We had been through hell together, but we had emerged stronger and closer than ever. "What now?" she asked one night as we sat in the small living room of our safe house, the news reports about Marconi flickering on the television. "We can't go back to our old lives," I said, looking at her intently. "We've seen too much. But maybe we can do something good with what we have left. Help others who are caught in this cycle." Mia nodded, a spark igniting in her eyes. You mean like a support group for people affected by organized crime? Exactly, I replied, feeling a sense of purpose bloom within me. We can share our experiences and help others find a way out. We can be a voice for those who feel powerless. We began to plan our next steps, brainstorming ways to create a community initiative that would provide support and resources to those affected by crime. It felt good to have a mission, something positive to focus on after everything we had endured. As the weeks turned into months, our initiative gained momentum. We connected with local organizations, shared our story, and began holding meetings where people could come together to discuss their experiences and find support. The response was overwhelming. We were no longer alone in our fight. Through this journey, I rediscovered a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I hadn't felt in years. Helping others became our new passion, and it transformed our lives in ways we had never anticipated. Mia and I grew closer, our bond forged through shared experiences and the common goal of making a difference. Then, one evening, as we sat in a small cafe discussing our plans, I looked at Mia and felt a rush of gratitude. I couldn't have done this without you, I said sincerely. You were my anchor through all of this. Mia smiled softly, her eyes shimmering with warmth. And you were mine. We make a great team. With each passing day, we continued to thrive. Our initiative gained recognition, and we were invited to speak at community events, sharing our story and encouraging others to take action against the forces of crime and corruption. But the biggest change came unexpectedly. One sunny afternoon, as we were organizing a community event in the park, I realized how far we had come. Surrounded by laughter and hope, I turned to Mia and said, I think I want to take this to the next level. What do you mean? She asked, curious. I want to build a life with you, I said, my heart racing. I want us to be more than just partners in this fight. I want us to be partners in life. Mia's face lit up, her smile radiant. I want that too. I've never felt more alive than I do now, with you by my side. As we embraced, I felt a sense of peace envelop me. The darkness of the past had been replaced by the light of hope and love, and I knew we had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. A few months later, we stood hand in hand at a community event, the sun shining down on us as people from all walks of life came together to celebrate resilience and unity. The park was alive with laughter, music, and the joyful chatter of families. This is what it's all about, I said, watching the children play. A community coming together to support one another. Mia squeezed my hand. And it's just the beginning. We have so much more to do. As we exchanged smiles, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. From the depths of despair and fear, we had emerged stronger and more united than ever. We had not only taken down a powerful crime lord but had also built something beautiful from the ashes. And in that moment, I knew that our journey was just beginning. Together, we would continue to fight for those who felt lost, to shine a light on the shadows, and to build a brighter future for ourselves and our community. As we looked out at the sea of faces filled with hope and determination, I felt a profound sense of happiness. This was our life now, one filled with purpose, love, and the unwavering belief that together, we could change the world.